Okay, welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Phil, is there a way I can pronounce your name that people will not understand what it is? Because there are a lot of people in the world who think my name is Connery Bush.
Oh, I saw some of that. That was great.
It's kind of a better name than Connor Rebush.
I mean, it kind of is. It's got much more of a kind of, I think it's just got a much classier, cooler vibe to it.
No, there's a certain formula. I've thought of this sometimes, trying to think of pseudonyms for myself that I might use someday. And a definite formula that works is first name that is actually a surname, followed by single noun surname, right? Mm. So if I wanted to have a name, it would be like Washington Hill, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jefferson Towns, something like that. Connery Bush definitely has that vibe, so I might just adopt it.
Yeah, it makes you sound more like some kind of noir detective, or like perhaps the owner of a mansion out in the countryside. Like any one of these things.
What you're saying is it gives the authentic picture of who I am as an individual.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome to Heavy Hands, hosted by me, Connery Bush, and my intrepid co-host, Philma Kenzie. Philma
it doesn't work.
Philma's not quite as good, which is why I'm tempted to really try to stick with it. But welcome to the show this week. We're in a weird place, scheduling-wise. Maybe not as weird as we would like it to be, because frankly, the fact that the UFC schedule surrounding us on either side is kind of shit is not altogether new to us. But we also have bizarre other events going on, like, for example, Jake Paul versus that guy who Phil and I both think might be a basketball player. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a weird smattering of things. So let me try and lay it out, see if I can actually remember. First things first, we are going to get into this upcoming UFC main event, which is between Jack Hermansson and Marvin Vettori. We can't get into that without, of course, mourning the loss of the beautiful short notice main event that should have been Kevin Holland versus Jack Hermansson. After that, I believe we will be getting into last weekend's weird pay-per-view, Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr., which I loved. And which Phil is entirely not sold on, as far as I can tell. So we're going to discuss that. I actually thought it was really impressive. It made me think about things like a senior league for fighters, and it's a pretty good argument as to why that would actually be an enjoyable idea. So we'll get into that, segment 2, and then at the end of the show, at the very, very, very end, in what will probably be a 2-minute third segment, we're going to talk about last weekend's UFC card. Okay, so that's everything. Phil, should we get into Hermansson Vettori, or should we delay it a moment longer to say that all the things we feel about Kevin Holland no longer being part of this fight, and also, let's not forget, more importantly, being sick with the Rona?
Yeah. Best wishes to Kevin Holland. I mean, even though they have already rebooked him to fight Jacare Souza in one of the more inexplicable fights I can imagine, and one which will in some way make me sad whatever happens.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, so this was originally going to be Till Hermansson. And so the Till selection in this one has been replaced twice. And now we've got Marvin Vettori, who is good, and who is the kind of person who I think needs this kind of thing to happen, frankly, in order for him to get pushed up the rankings.
I mean, right at the start, let's say, my gut feeling is Hermansson Vettori maybe lacks a certain storytelling appeal, I guess, that Hermansson Till has, although at this point I'm not entirely sure why Darren Till has so much weight as a potential character. But as an action fight, it's probably a far superior matchup. right? Like Darren Till could have gotten a very ugly fight out of Jack Hermanson, and he would have done his best to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably unless Kevin Holland has dramatically improved his wrestling and takedown defense, it's probably a more competitive fight than the Kevin Holland one, to be honest.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably actually. So it's, it doesn't feel like a main event is the only thing, but it's as a matchup, I think it's pretty good. It's kind of right up my street actually, as far as middleweight fights go. So, best wishes to Kevin Holland. He's a brave man. It's very gratifying to see that like his constant activity, during this quarantine has actually like gotten him a little bit of, minor star power. Like people actually mention Kevin Holland out of the blue. People who aren't even just talking to me or referencing the show, which I love. Like his star is rising. But I guess, something that happens if you're coming out frequently, making yourself known during a pandemic is you might get sick. So, hopefully he's better with no long lasting effects very soon. Until we find out what's going on with him. Hermanson Vettori. Why is it a better matchup than either of the other two?
Basically for the points we laid out, it's more likely, I think, to be competitive than Vettori and Hermanson, and it won't have Darren Till trying to slow it down to a crawl.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think about Marvin Vettori? I think I saw Jack Slack on Twitter saying, I've just watched tons of Marvin Vettori footage, and all that I have in terms of notes at the end of this is meat and potatoes.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, sometimes sometimes meat and potatoes to a maddening degree, right? Because there have definitely been matchups where you would like to see more out of Vettori. I kind of want to define meat and potatoes, in fact, because of saying that, it almost sounds like I'm like, Marvin Vettori needs to do more spin kicks. And that's not what I want. But there is definitely a thing where there's not a lot of variation in the relatively small set of tools that Marvin Vettori uses. And I think that's where he suffers. He's not a particularly creative fighter, like, intellectually speaking. So in terms of like coming up with different rhythms, in terms of coming up with like creative feints, all this like variation that we see just really subtly clever fighters use to make what is essentially just a 1-2 and a low kick feel like so much more isn't really there. So at a certain point in most of the more competitive fights Vettori has, he seems to just kind of have to do all the same stuff but harder. You know what Marvin Vettori makes me think of? He makes me realize the many points of comparison between a division like middleweight and a division like women's bantamweight. He's kind of Jennifer Maya. That's women's flyweight, but you know what I mean? He's that kind of fighter. He doesn't necessarily have like another gear to go to. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Mm-hmm. I think the problem with him is that he's very much of an archetype, and there are better and or more interesting fighters who also have that approach, because he really is. He has become, I think, much more of a prototypical King's MMA fighter. Like you said, jab, 1-2, and primarily left hand and body kick.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty tough. He can get physically overwhelmed. If he's pushed back, then he gets in trouble. All this other kind of stuff, and you might find yourself thinking, I wish I was actually just watching RDA or Dariush at this point, other than this guy. And, but together with that, he's also, like RDA and unlike Dariush, he's incredibly physically tough. And like both of them, he's a really good grappler.
Yeah, and let us not forget the core component of so many of these fighters is that he usually has Rafael Cordero in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think a lot of the famous toughness of fighters from that camp has to be attributed to Cordero, both as a trainer and the ruthless preparation he puts his fighters through, and also as a cornerman. Is really, really good at keeping his fighters from ever even imagining the point at which they might break. Right? He's the goat. He's the what's that Jim Carrey movie? Yes Man. Like that is Rafael Cordero is the embodiment of that kind of. He's like MMA's Tony Robinson, and not the one who hosted Time Team and was on Blackadder. The motivational speaker one.
Aww.
I know, not the good one. But Rafael Cordero is a good one. I like him. This is a very confused and belabored metaphor. So yeah, what is this? I mean, I like Marvin Vettori. I think he's fun, but he's not too fun, if you know what I mean. He's sort of like last weekend on that Tyson Jones card, there was also a fight with Badu Jack, who fought, I think, a short notice replacement that was not competitive in the slightest. A guy that, one of those fights where all you can say about the other guy is how tough he was by the end. And he's sort of like Badu Jack in that he's, I like watching him, but not that much. Like, I'm going to look at my phone once or twice. So how does that match up with Jack Hermansson? The extreme meat and potatoes, just simply always there, will not give you an easy fight. You have to say that for Marvin Vettori. What does Jack Hermansson do with that?
So this is an interesting one, right? Because it's not one of these guys where we find ourselves asking the question of how much is Jack Hermansson willing to throw his jab against the southpaw?
Yep.
And that was one of the questions we really wanted to see answered by the Kelvin Gastelum fight, which wasn't, because Kelvin got tapped almost instantaneously.
Yep. So, like, we can say confidently, knowing what Jack Hermansson does these days, he is going to try to take Marvin Vettori down. But we know nothing about how his stand-up pairs. And this does matter because, according to Fight Metric, now he hasn't fought a whole slew of amazing wrestlers or anything, but Marvin Vettori has 80% takedown defense. And he has stuffed shots from some decent wrestlers, like Omari Akhmedov stands out. Andrew Sanchez is not a great wrestler, but he's strong. Cesar Ferreira is a decent wrestler with good timing. And he has, prevented shots from all these guys. So that is very much something in his favor and makes it seem a lot more like a matchup where we're actually going to find out if Jack Hermansson can fight southpaws on the feet or not.
Yeah. And also, how much does Jack Hermansson need to get his wrestling game rolling in order to win fights? Mm-hmm. Because, a lot of that, a lot of what we said, in a complimentary manner, and because it was true, about, his fight with Jacare was that he was able to confront Jacare on the ground and kind of overwhelm him.
Yep.
But the question then is, did he do that because he knew he could win there, or did he do that because that is inescapably, a part of his process and his game breaks down if he can't hit takedowns?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that the hardest rounds of that fight were after the early wrestling success. Right? He stopped being able I don't know if he even stopped being able, did he attempt all that many takedowns overall? Ooh, here we go, actually. Fight Metric says 10 attempts. And notably, in round 3, we have here, he missed on 4. He attempted 4 and missed them all. The shape of that fight was one of Jacare succeeding more and more as it went on in pressuring and forcing Hermansson into corners and beating up his body. And, I think you could very easily make the argument that without being able to go to a well-timed shot, Hermansson does not have that all-important backstop that I talk about constantly, which is the ability to engage, to close the distance on his own terms, which really, really neuters an outside, long-range, jab-heavy fighter like Hermansson. You have to be able to stop running backwards at some point if that's the kind of style you're going to fall into. So, I really do think you could argue that this one is bound to get extremely interesting as it goes on. Because it seems likely, right, that Hermansson could surprise Vettori early. He's got great timing. He's got kind of weird takedowns that like blend with his striking. It's a lot of like knee tappy and duck under type stuff. Like sort of like dynamic entering into the clinch takedowns rather than even full shots. So you could see Vettori being surprised by that for sure. But I can also see Vettori stuffing those as the fight goes on. And
I think a lot of it will also come down to whether Hermansson can win in the clinch versus Vettori.
Yes, very much so.
Because he's, that was sort of who he was when we first saw him come to the UFC.
True.
He had a lot of like great work in the clinch, like short uppercuts. And
true. He beat up
stuff.
Scott Askham in the clinch, I recall.
So because I think that's really one of the tricks to beating sort of the RDA Kings archetype. It's not necessarily pushing them back. Does not necessarily have to be takedowns. It can be,
right.
But it's the fact that you are going to physically clash with them at some point, and you have to be able to dictate when you do that.
Right. A clinch fulfills the same strategic function I was talking about before. Like boxers can't hit you with a reactive takedown. They step into the clinch. It's still closing distance on the outsider's terms. So yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was pretty much. That was pretty much it. I mean, the only thing I was going to say is that, like, Hermansson, I think his main, like, physical advantage in this fight is obviously reach. I think that's probably going to help him quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think he probably needs to be able to just keep a high volume on Vettori from range, and then he needs to keep a very high pace in the clinch. I'm not too sure that Hermansson can do that and survive. Like you said, it's the fact that like Hermansson's fights have tended to, even that Souza fight where he was having lots of success, he lost that last round, the clearest out. That was the clear round that he lost, right?
Yeah. It was that or the fourth. It might have been. He might have lost the fourth, but then just nicked the fifth.
Yeah. And then, no, sorry, it was the one. Yeah, I think it was the third when he got hurt.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think he got hurt in 2 rounds.
Yeah, it might be the third and the fifth. You might be right.
Yeah. But
he did get a takedown in round 5, so.
Yeah. And Vettori, conversely, has sort of he's done it the other way around.
Yeah.
His struggles against, like, Mari Akhmadov was when he was losing the early going, and then he kind of stormed back to get a 10-8 third round.
Even against Israel Adesanya, it was like
even against Adesanya,
it was like an interrupted sort of arc, but it was a subdued version of the same sort of arc to that fight, where he was just never quite able to break through. But Hermansson is not Adesanya, not athletically, not skill wise. He's not nearly as creative or as diverse or flexible strategically. But he did. Yeah, go on.
I mean, that's the thing. It's that being a super good grappler has never worked against Vettori.
Right.
Everyone who has beaten him up have generally been good grapplers, but they have had some of the people who have beaten him up or fought him have been good grapplers, but they have not had any real success with the grappling.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I kind of feel like I have to pick Vettori over 5.
Yeah, the biggest
just to bounce Hermansson off him in the grappling, and to be able to like just be way tougher in the stand up.
Mm-hmm. The last person to have tremendous success against Vettori with that style was Shoeface.
Yeah, was that like his UFC debut?
It's his second UFC fight.
Yeah.
Yep.
Even then, it took him several he couldn't take him down in the first round. I think, and he still had a he still had a hell of a time, like, getting significant control on Vettori.
Yeah, and I do think there's some reason to believe Vittori's gotten better since then. Like, at the very least with the well-timed doubles that Shoeface was hitting on him. You know, he did stop a couple of those, as I recall, from Akhmedov, who also is a well-timed takedown guy. I don't know. Yeah, the thing with Vettori, right, is that this is the frustrating thing with him. And also I think it's part and parcel with why I love him, right? This is the middleweightness that he can't escape. Is like, he never really like pushes through that barrier of this is normal volume for a fighter. Right? Like he is like sort of a building fighter, but like not always as much as you want him to be. And I think it is a lot of that sort of roteness or whatever. Like, he has to like fucking amp himself up and like get into this like almost Anderson Silva-esque like jumping herky jerky, like, I know you're going to hit me and I'm prepared for that and I'm going to hit you back and keep throwing mode. And it takes some rounds for him to get there. And it has to be said that like, even as his wrestling success dwindled, Jack Hermansson did match or exceed Jacare in volume in like all those rounds, every single one. So like, even if he's put into a situation like Jacare put him in, he's still going to fight back. He's still going to have moments. And is Marvin Vettori, is he like as subtle as Jacare Souza? Because he's really not that much more diverse. Is he as clever? Is he as creative? Does he hit the body as much as Jacare? I don't even think he does that, despite being a Kings fighter.
I mean, he still kicks the body, but yeah, even then, he probably doesn't do it as much as either RDA or Dariush.
And he may not want to kick the body.
I mean, the main thing is just that like Vettori isn't a million years old, like Jacare is.
Right. Yeah.
It's a sort of balancing factor.
Yeah, and crucially, Vettori, despite maybe not having the most like exciting pace or whatever, like just not quite having the pace I want him to have, he does have incredible cardio.
Yeah, you always feel like he could have. I think has he fought a 5-round? I don't think he has.
I don't think he has.
But I feel like he would.
Yes,
I feel like he would work very well in a 5-rounder because his pace amps up over the fight.
Yes, that's my feeling as well.
Rarely enough, like just so you get into the 3rd round and you're like, oh yeah, now we're seeing it, and then the fight's over.
Right, I'm predicting that, but I am also predicting that once I've seen him fight for 5 rounds, I will say about Marvin Vettori, man, if only there were 10-round fights. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's probably true.
Like, I still feel like he'll reach the end of this and there will be more. He could have ramped up further. I think I am going to pick him, though.
Yeah, I don't really want to. I much prefer Hermansson. He's much more fun.
Yeah. And if Hermansson, it is possible, looking at that Shoeface fight, like, Hermansson could definitely surprise him and just tie him up with something brutal on the ground, like some Japanese necktie or some shit. Really early. Like that could happen.
Yeah, or if he can just, keys on Vettori enough to keep him on the back foot.
Yeah, but at that point it becomes a real test of how well he does against an increasingly aggressive southpaw. I don't know. It's an interesting matchup. It's compelling and arguably more compelling for like the average fight fan than either of the last 2 attempts at making this main event. So obviously, we are more saddened than anyone else on earth by the loss of Kevin Holland in this matchup, but I know it's okay, Phil. All right, we're gonna pull ourselves together, take a break. And we'll be back to discuss Old Men after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Yeah, I have to do it at some point. I was gonna do it for the Jeremiah of Leon card, but I'm now not sure when I should do it. Because
the trouble with this new model of scheduling is that it's hard to time these things so that they feel relevant and current.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well. I mean, I should just be writing it anyway. Even if I had a deadline, I'd be like, oh, I can write that a few days before it, and then I would just end it. I would end up doing that fucking thing where I'm writing at 2:00 in the morning the day after I promised myself I would. The day after I said I would submit it.
I wouldn't know anything about all that.
Yeah, you're not a kindred spirit at all.
No, I definitely didn't finish my last 2 articles at 7 a.m.
Man, I respect it.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be, in fact, just the best way that I write. It's to I don't know about you, Phil. I'm a momentum guy. Like, I really benefit from having a little time to start rolling downhill. And then I get
I'm just a terror guy. I'm just this is going to be stupid. So I can't start writing it until the fear of not doing it is greater than the fear of doing it.
Yeah. I think I've gotten over that somewhat. With just being I think honestly being online has helped me with that. Because I have been wrong and looked like a fool so many times online. And things that are, unless I wanted to do something, to some extent are essentially there forever.
Yeah.
So I'm just I don't know, Kyle Kulinski, whom I like, he does, I don't know if you know who that is, he does a lefty, news type internet show, like a Majority Report type thing.
Uh-huh.
He, recently had something come out where people were calling out old tweets of his, and he was just extremely upfront. And that was fucking stupid. He was I took a lot of Adderall and drank a lot of Four Locos and acted like a shithead in 2011 online. And it's that's a good way to do it, honestly.
Respect it.
So I think that has helped me to not worry so much about the fact that my articles are bad. Some people are going to be dumb enough to think they're good.
I was torn between being nice and being mean there.
Well, some people are going to be.
It was such an easy setup for a dunk.
Yeah.
But I was immediately tempted when you were like, no, I don't really mind if my articles are bad. Just the shithead in me was tempted to be like, well, that's good because they are, or something along those lines.
Yeah, you should have been
the rest. Your articles are very good.
The rest of us still mind, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But some people are going to be dumb enough to think they're good, like you. So it's fine if I think they're bad.
All right, we better get on with this.
All right. Well, segment 2, people can hear me typing in the marker, and yet I'm also doing the intro at the same time for segment 2. This is segment 2. Hello, welcome back to the show. We're talking about
professionalism.
Yeah, we're talking about Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. in possibly the greatest fight of the new decade yet. And Phil, I wanted to talk to you about this and was immediately met with some degree of skepticism. Is that a fair characterization of your attitude?
Yeah, I feel like the internet is lying to me at the moment because
you have not
did
seen
not
this,
watch this fight. And immediately afterwards, when I was tuning into the internet, as one does, saw a bunch of people saying oh yeah, that was good and that was fun. I thought Mike Tyson looks really good. And I'm just figuring that you're all fucking lying to me.
Yeah, we are. I mean, the world is in a vast conspiracy to fool and ultimately humiliate Phil McKenzie.
Exactly.
Kenzie. Speaking of, by the way, this is only slightly related, but since we came up short on bonus episodes in November, and I would like to make good on that. We have been people have demanded that we also watch Fight Circus.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
If you'd rather watch that than Tyson Jones Jr., we should do a bonus episode on Fight Circus next week.
Well, yeah.
Okay, cool. I've mentioned it on the show, so now at the very least we'll get yelled at when we don't do it.
Wait.
Yeah, it was good, Tyson Jones. Like, it was like actually a good fight. And I mean it. I'm being serious.
Right, how many rounds was this exhibition with all the weird rules around it?
It was like 8 2-minute rounds.
Okay. How many of those rounds did Roy Jones Jr. come close to winning?
Frankly, I did see like a couple other people I respect saying they thought the scorecards were close. I did not score while watching. My like vague narrative impression was that Mike Tyson was the only one who appeared to like have winning definitive moments. So anywhere, you could say for Jones, anywhere from 0 to 4. He definitely didn't win.
Uh-huh.
But I did find it to be like, so first of all, before I get into like the technical things that I enjoyed about it, and there were plenty, and I don't think honestly that should even be surprising to hear, cause like we're talking about Mike Tyson and Roy Jones. So this is a million universes away from something like having Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz fight again as old men, right? Like these guys were actually good. They were like really good, like really truly good at what they did. Whereas in MMA, we are still very close to an era where the sport was like not good.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things which probably make the boxing senior circuit more appealing than the MMA senior circuit.
Yeah, so that's the thing I want to talk about first. We need a senior circuit. Yeah. This proves that it's good. So go ahead. Lay out the case for why boxing is the place to do that.
Well, as you mentioned, like, boxer in the 90s, a championship boxer, even a championship heavyweight boxer, is a lot more skilled than his compatriot from MMA.
Oh my God, yes.
He was in a much more developed form of the sport, and he was at the top of a much more developed form of the sport. In the same way,
setting aside like the athletic ability difference, the fact that like boxing paid a hell of a lot more, so it actually was drawing superior athletes to these roles. When Mike Tyson was fighting, he was doing so with some 200 odd years of boxing tradition and knowledge behind him. Which MMA does not have the same advantage.
Yeah. But like next is the athletic thing.
Yeah.
Like a boxer, yeah, again, like these guys are superlative athletes.
Yes.
Albeit super old ones. And their counterparts from MMA just weren't.
Right.
You know, I mean, you could, like, a 50-something-year-old Yoel Romero probably still gonna look pretty good.
Yeah, right.
Like 50-something-year-old Daniel Cormier would probably, you know, I mean, he'll probably be incredibly fat by then.
Who's someone with a great systematic style and athleticism. Like a 60-year-old Jose Aldo will still be able to walk into a gym and embarrass some average ass MMA fighter, you know?
Yeah. Although the other two things are that MMA, like, it's built as a construction of so many interlocking systems. If you fail at one of them, you're going to die very quickly. You know, that's why everyone gets absolutely pasted on the regionals. And I think, you know, boxing is at least more familiar in that, you know, just going to be standing throwing hands with each other, and they've got a sort of, I guess, like a consensual level of skill there. It's you know, it's less likely that like one part of their game will just disintegrate.
Yeah.
And I think lastly, it's that boxing is not the injury generating machine that MMA is.
Correct. Yeah. I would agree with all of that. And I think, none of that is an argument as to why a seniors league shouldn't happen, but it is an argument as to why it maybe shouldn't happen in MMA for at least another like 30 years. Cause yeah, I want to get to the point where I'm seeing ancient Yoel Romeros, you know, still trying their stuff out, and ancient Jose Aldos. Yeah, cool. I don't want to see Hoist Gracie fight ever again, is what I'm trying to say. Ever. Or Ken Shamrock, or Frank Shamrock, or Tito, or Chuck, or any of these people. Now, I know, Phil, that the idea of a seniors league does fly in the face of one of your most deeply held beliefs, which is
The canon.
the canon, the Phil canon, which is that it's good when old men are murdered by men 30 years younger than them. You like when that happens.
That's what they get.
You think it's funny. That's what they get. I just don't know how you could say that. Like, I get it. I'm a piece of shit too. But, like, about, like, beloved fighters, you're like, that's what they get for being victims of time. I think you might be bitter about your own age, Phil.
Was that, so it was that fight where it was, someone wrote up, the fight between Lewis and, Marciano, right?
Yeah.
And, at the end, he was like, can't remember what the lines were, but he said basically that Marciano, you know, had his dreams, and Lewis still had his dreams. He still had his dreams of ruling the world and conquering boxing, but the place for old men to dream is by the fire. Like,
poignant line.
Yeah, it was a great line. Obviously, much better than my butchering of it, but you know,
much better than your
new place, old man.
Much better than you've turned this nice, poetic, McCarthy-esque thought, Cormac McCarthy-esque thought into like teenage vitriol, which I really admire you for. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that at a certain point, you know, it is a necessary part of the deep evil that is combat sports, that you get old and then you get fed to younger, currently better fighters. You know, from the Dr. Wyman era of heavy hands, we have a law which still holds true, which is the law of conservation of hype. You only get hype by stealing it from people who had it before you. So like that does need to happen, to build up young fighters to an extent. But let me tell you why I liked this Tyson Jones fight so much. I'm going to try to convince you that it's worth watching. And for all of our listeners out there, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to tell you why it was so fun and exciting. And I had like an earnest, pleasant experience watching it. And I'm not even just talking about the Jake Paul part. What I think this fight was, and that's the first thing to say, right, is that it was a fight, which I kind of didn't expect. There was a lot of sort of mystery clouding the contracts between these two men, and I think a lot of people did expect them to just kind of, you know, it was an exhibition fight. I think a lot of people expected them to just do a sparring match. Mike Tyson, at the very least, was trying to take Roy Jones's fucking head off. That became clear, like, from the first round. So, point one in his favor, it was an actual fight between two old men. It was what I imagine a seniors league would look like. The other thing, though, is that, and this should appeal to you, Phil, I think a seniors league is naturally designed to favor superior technicians, which is what you and I have in our hearts always wanted, right? There's a reason we like middleweights and journeymen and fighters who succeed despite inferior athleticism. So this is, a seniors league is like fanfic for regular combat sports, where you just get to indulge the straight up like libidinal desire you have to get what you want out of the entertainment. It's just like pure rewarding in that when fighters get old, the ones who relied during their primes on ironclad technique are going to look better than the ones who relied on their athleticism, because both people in any of these cases will have lost a good deal of their athletic abilities. And that was the case here. Roy Jones, whom at this point it's like, I'm expecting basically like another wave of Roy Jones apologia. How do you say that? Apologia?
I don't actually know, you know. I've never heard it. I've only ever seen it
I know.
written.
I've read it. Well, I'm going to throw both of those pronunciations out there as options. I'm expecting a wave at some, you know how Larry Holmes gets like retconned every 10 years? But people are like, Larry Holmes was a joke. Mike Tyson's record doesn't mean anything. He beat an old Larry Holmes. And then like in the next 10 years, people will be like, man, Larry Holmes is so underrated. That dude was amazing. This always happens. And I'm expecting that to happen with Jones because the number of people who came to me, specifically just me, after the fight and were talking about, Jones has a style that was built on his athleticism. Oh, it fell off when his athleticism declined. That's now become such a common understanding of his game. I'm waiting for the turn where people are like, man, people think Roy Jones was dumb. People don't appreciate how clever Roy Jones was and how much his style made sense. I do think both those things are true. Like, just because Roy Jones had an athletic style, his style wasn't like dumb or crude. It was brilliant. It's just that it was designed to make the most out of the fact that he could do things other people couldn't do. So much so that became like a foundation of how he beat people. Mike Tyson, on the other hand, who's also an astounding physical athlete, he came up under Cus D'Amato, who is a very old school, extremely systematic trainer. He's the kind of guy who would have an 18-year-old Mike Tyson watching footage of Sam Lankford, and Joe Louis and Jack Dempsey, and, like George Dixon, like all of these old great boxers, to understand how techniques fit together, how there is such a thing as a proper and an improper way to do anything you might want to do in a boxing match. He was a textbook trainer. Even if his textbook was different from other people's, which it was. Like, for example, Mike Tyson has back problems because Cus D'Amato teaches a style of head movement which fucks up your lower back. It was still a textbook. It was systematic. And in this fight, we saw, like, why people are supposed to learn systematic technique. Because, like I said, Mike Tyson kind of took it to Roy Jones. And it wasn't just a weight advantage thing or anything. In fact, they were both the same weight, I think. It was entirely because Roy Jones' moves, now that he has fallen from his athletic peak, they read simply as inefficient. His footwork, his darting punches, they're not tricky anymore. They're just obvious. Because they were only tricky because of his physicality. Mike Tyson is definitely slower, definitely has less snap. All of those things are obvious to the eye, and yet the pieces all still fit together. All the efficiency is still there. So it bolts back onto an older frame way better than Roy Jones's game did, to my eyes. And the thing I think is most impressive about this, and why this is such a great example of how great and wonderful technique is that Roy Jones, of the two men, has actually fought very recently. Like, when did Roy Jones Jr. retire? 2-3 years ago? It was very recently. And yeah, he was fighting like, glass-jawed journeymen and whatnot for the last several years of his career. But, activity does mean a lot. And Mike Tyson hasn't been active since the 90s. And yet, Tyson was the one who looked like he could actually still get in the ring and fight. So, that's my case for Tyson Jones Jr., Phil. I've talked for too long. Give me your reaction.
There's a couple of things, firstly, Tyson would have won this fight at any point in their careers, right?
I don't know.
Pretty much any point in their careers?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that before I gave you a definitive answer. My gut feeling is yes. But also, I'd never seen Mike Tyson fight somebody like Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr. was such a special fighter in his prime. There's nobody who really compares. Roy Jones Jr. does shit that Prince Naz, that Nassim Hamed did, except without fucking up, without making mistakes. He made that sort of extravagance look perfect and flawless. So I don't know. That's hard to say. He was Roy Jones Jr.
The size thing, I think is probably,
yeah.
There's definitely a relative size, question there, because some people are, something I realized again, like, you know, reading through old like accounts of boxing fights, is that people can be like technically bigger than, or, you know, the same size as someone. And again, like this was, I think this was a Marciano fight. This was Archie Moore Marciano, I think. I didn't realize Moore actually outweighed him.
Yeah.
Like everyone watching it was just like, oh no, this man is...
Archie Moore got fat as hell between fights.
Yeah. And everyone watching was just like, oh no, this man is much more physical.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, you know, Tyson is always going to have like a pretty massive, just like power and physicality edge in this fight.
There are stories about Archie Moore sneaking donuts and fried chicken past his manager into his hotel room when he was in camp for fights. So yes, I would say that Jones, who was not a heavyweight for most of his career, definitely closer to that kind of bulk than Tyson, who is like made of steel.
Yeah.
He is just a heavy set, thickly built person.
And a pretty small, you know, a pretty small, but yeah,
stocky,
compact heavyweight.
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing about the athleticism, I think, is probably, it might be something of a mirage that has been sort of delivered by two guys who deteriorated at approximately similar rates, because, you know, I mean, like I mentioned Yoel Romero, for example. Seen Yoel Romero have multiple fights where he is clearly the quote unquote younger man in the cage, and he is in fact, you know, 8 to 10 years older than the other guy.
Yes.
You know, Lyoto Machida, Chris Weidman, all this other kind of stuff where you're just like, oh yeah, like, so the thing is that like a senior division would also have the thing where would get your Yoel Romeros who hold onto their athleticism for a long time, and then you would get guys who would just, you know, sort of athletically fall into pieces. And the Yoel Romero would absolutely obliterate them.
Maybe we did see some of that here too, right? Maybe that's in part a benefit of Tyson's lack of activity. Perhaps it... Because Tyson did have a lot of physical issues. Like I said, the D'Amato head movement had his back. He would have like Kevin Rooney like crack his back between every round by the last few years of his career because he had such chronic back pain and problems. So yeah, maybe the fact that unlike Jones, he has actually been taking time away for ages now, benefited him and allowed his athleticism to kind of stay a little more. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but I think also it's just two guys who were incredible athletes who have just fallen from a relatively high bar. But the thing is that like, that I think can makes it feel like this kind of approach will give that kind of outcome more often. Because I think, you know, there would be times where like you'd get an Aldo or something who had held on to his athleticism, and then you'd get some poor guy who just hadn't.
Yeah.
He would get blown out of
presumably
the ring.
Matt Wyman.
Yeah.
Will be in the Seniors League. He's currently in the UFC. So, yep. Look forward to Aldo versus Wyman. That's a fair point. It probably would not have nearly the same appeal. Although I
think I've watched some highlights of the fight now, grudgingly. And you're right. It does look like it's like a real rugged, tough scrap. And all the stuff before it did not make it look like it was going to be much of that at all.
Right. And maybe that's part of the marketing success, right? Set everyone up to believe it's just going to be two old men not trying to hurt each other. And then if it's anything like a fight, it's satisfying and fun. Yeah, I think there was a bit of that. But I will say, you know, I think if you've seen the highlights, Phil, will you at least co-sign that people who like fighting will probably enjoy seeing two absolute legends of boxing going at it in advanced age?
Yeah, it's surprisingly like... Yeah, it is. It just looks surprisingly good. Like,
yeah, go watch
it. Tyson's hand speed is still there. He's still throwing combinations.
The body shots he throws in that fight.
Yeah.
Ooh. Tyson's left hook is still Tyson's left hook. And for me personally, like, it's just a pleasure to see that. Like, I've never seen a Mike Tyson fight live. So I got to see a Mike Tyson fight live. It's kind of cool. I don't care if I'm seeing the, you know, like the Eagles with two of them dead doing a tour when they're all, the ones who remain are now 75 years old. I still get to see the Eagles. You know, I saw John Fogerty and Bruce Springsteen as old men, and I'm still glad I got to do it. I saw B.B. King like 2 years before he died, and maybe he wasn't the B.B. King of his youth, but it was very much a worthwhile experience for me to get to see him. So this definitely had that appeal as well. And, by the way, I mentioned at the top of the segment my planned glut of bonus content for December, a Christmas gift, which is in fact a make good for a slow November. I think I'm going to do a commentary, if I can get the timing to work, on Tyson Jones. So people online pester me about this shit if that doesn't show up on the Heavy Hands Patreon in a matter of days. It should show up very soon because I'm working on it now. But anyway.
Tyson Usyk next?
Say what now? Tyson Usyk.
Usyk next?
Shut the fuck up. Yeah. back to the Phil McKenzie way. No, let's take a break. Let's forget about that. Let's not let any potential promoters who might be listening to the show have heard that suggestion, because they will probably go for it. And let's talk about whatever the fuck happened in the Octagon last weekend after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. I mistakenly told you at the end of the last segment that we were moving on to last weekend's UFC card, but the future still feels so full of promise. You know, there's still the potential for goodness, whereas whatever happened last weekend, its potential was clearly drained well before that event started. So we're going to actually cover a couple more of the fights from this upcoming UFC card, notably the main card opener. Movsar Evloev is fighting Nate Landwehr in what should be a fun, if somewhat predictable, fight for Evloev, who is, as far as I can tell, just the significantly better built fighter. And then we're going to talk about Matt Wyman versus Jordan Leavitt. Speak of the devil, Phil, old Matt Wyman's on this card. No, what was it? Gabe Benitez is fighting Justin James, who knocked out our boy Frank Camacho. And people know I love Gabriel Benitez. I will always show up to watch that dude fight. Those are both very enticing to me. Let's hit Evloev versus Landwehr first, if you don't mind. Do you have any thoughts on Movsar Evloev as a prospect, Phil? He's still 26. He's now 3-0 in the UFC. Was an M1 champion before that.
Yeah, I mean, he looks pretty great so far,
Uh-huh.
I'd say. I think Bolsover is, like, a fantastic test, as we said we thought he might be. But, like, not only kept up with Barzola,
Mm-hmm.
kind of managed to outpace him
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time. And I think that probably, like, translates pretty well to a fight with Landwehr.
Mm-hmm.
I think. So yeah, I mean, I think he's basically, I think, probably going to carve out a niche for himself as being the equivalent of what's his face? The guy at is he Georgian? The guy at bantamweight, Dvalishvili. Like a more technical, more dangerous version of Dvalishvili, where he's just a tireless, endless wrestler, who's just going to keep going until he breaks the other guy.
Yeah, he's almost like the Rory McDonald to Dvalishvili's GSP. Like there's a similarity there that I can appreciate, but I don't think I would have even thought of them as being the same sort of filling the same sort of role before you mentioned that. Because Evloev's style, like what I really like about Evloev is this sort of like weird uniqueness of how his game operates. In fact, it is very GSP. Sometimes it's a lot of jab and takedown switch ups. But he's got this weird jolting way of throwing his punches. He really drops into his shots. He's like that sort of trigger drop step thing, that Jack Dempsey drop step adds a lot of weight to just mere jabs. Like a lot of it is like straight power punches, mixed up with takedowns. And then of course he is just, basically a nightmare on the ground, really brutal ground and pound, as well as being just a strong scrambler in general.
Yeah, I do feel like his tendency to try and throw punches after literally everything.
Yeah.
Like, failed takedown, 1-2, clinch break 1-2. Like, tendency to throw after everything is both good for keeping his pace up, but also means I do suspect he's going to get absolutely deaded by a counterpunch one of these days, like a really nasty one.
Yeah,
but it's going to be really interesting because I think that they're gonna keep matching him up with. Then they're not going to match him up with any of the many excellent strikers in this division, because that's not how the UFC does.
Yeah. Strikers are supposed to fight each other, Phil.
Yeah, exactly.
Segregation.
And fight wrestlers when it's for the belt.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think this is in some way a soft test of that. Because if Loev there's a downside to dropping really hard into your long punches like that and literally throwing yourself bodily into range with what, thrown differently, should be your safe, uncounterable punches. And there's also just a straight up postural thing. Like he's very bolt upright. He's very front foot heavy. So the head is always high and frequently in range. And as you said, he's following with punches, I think it's an attempt to be an initiative holding fighter. Anytime that the exchange ends, he wants to immediately put you back under pressure. And so most of the time, I think it's difficult to counter that because he catches you in this moment when you're still sort of reeling from whatever last exchange you had. But Landwehr is a bit of a counterpuncher, is the point I was getting to. I mean, granted, landing lots and lots of counters on Darren Elkins doesn't say all that much. But the fact that he will go for them, that he does have the instinct to immediately swing back, and not even all that recklessly when he gets tagged, he's very comfortable being hit and very comfortable exchanging with people. So there's something to it there. The only thing I'll say to maybe to emphasize why this is a soft test of that potential weakness is that all of that worked pretty well for Nate Landwehr against Darren Elkins because Darren Elkins couldn't really take him down. And Darren Elkins does go for a lot of takedowns, but kind of historically doesn't get many of them. Let's go ahead and check the stats real quick. Got any stats for me on Darren Elkins' takedown success?
Sadly, I do not, but this was largely a kickboxing match.
Takedown accuracy, 33%. Darren Elkins is a guy who shoots a lot. That is his thing. It's about the attempts. He's a pace fighter and always has been. And so actually having sufficient takedown defense to beat his shots isn't all that impressive. Depending on what your style is. And I think fighting him from range, trying to counter him really allowed Landwehr to just Elkins does not set up shots well. And he's not a quick, powerful shooter. They're from far away, they're really low, and you can pretty much stop them because you see them coming. And that is specifically not a Movsar Evloev trait. He sets up his takedowns really well. They're fully integrated into his game. So I think that will drastically change how competitive Landwehr is able to be on the feet, and will probably make it pretty hard to actually get the timing on those counters, which, let's remember, didn't necessarily start landing all that clean, even on Darren Elkins, until, later in the first round of their fight. So, pretty easy pick for Evloev, but Landwehr is like super game and will throw counters, and doesn't get tired, and loves a brawl. So there's potential for this one to boil over at a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is obviously that, like, looking for those counters against Elkins, got Landwehr touched up a lot.
Yes.
Is not a defensively sound striker.
Evloev could knock him out.
Yeah.
Evloev
at least just, rack up a bunch of just on him, because unless he's chip shot kicking people, Darren Elkins is not hurting them on the feet.
Yeah. Right. And Evloev typically hasn't either. He's not historically been a knockout artist, but he is still very young and relatively inexperienced. And I can't be the only person who, like, lately has noted a serious audible power in the shots that he lands. That was not there when he was an even younger man. So I think he may, in fact, be a bit of a puncher, just sort of waiting to realize that himself. I like that fight. Good one. It's not a huge test for Evloev, but that's all right. He's young. I don't mind them giving him these kinds of fights for a little while as he settles into the division. The other one we wanted to talk about, Gabriel Benitez is fighting Justin James. And really, I think this is just kind of, it feels like a showcase for Benitez to me, which I like.
Yeah.
Yeah, you agree? You put Benitez in there with a fighter like Jason Knight, or this is a great comparison actually to James, Sam Sicilia, for one reason. And it's because you want to see him do horrible things to a guy who is going to consistently swing at him. You want to put Gabriel Benitez in killer counterpuncher mode. And this seems like a great opportunity for that. I think James is an extremely heavy-handed fighter who doesn't really manage to surprise many people after the first round. And Benitez is not only probably tough enough to survive a bad spot in the early going, but also just like one of the cleverest, like mid-ranked fighters in this division. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got I like Benitez. He's got a classy game.
Yeah. He gave a hell of a tough fight to Sadiq Youssef. It was incredibly competitive. He hurt Youssef on like 2 occasions in that fight. He's great. I love Benitez's style.
I did find myself wondering in the Morales fight.
Mm-hmm.
I did find myself wondering whether Benitez is starting to fall off a bit.
He could.
He's not that old. He's only like 32.
But he's been fighting since 2007.
Yeah, he looked like his punches didn't look like they had the pop they used to against Morales.
Yeah.
So it was like, he's always been a very physical fighter.
True. The speed in particular has been a huge asset for him.
Yeah, but like you said, James, I think specifically like the way James looked so lost in the open stance matchup against Gavin Tucker. He was just like, oh, do I chase this guy down and throw a right hand? Like, he looked very awkward trying to like get corralling with the hook, the left hook. Like, he was forcing himself to do it. Like, didn't look happy in that. Yep. In against Southpaws.
Yeah, that specifically is a pretty strong indication he's going to struggle here. He did, to his credit, he really kept going for Gavin Tucker, and there were moments in that where I recall being quite worried for Tucker's success. In part, it was because he was so dependent on his wrestling. I'm not 100% sure whether that was just because Gavin Tucker has clearly invested in becoming a better wrestler, which is obvious.
He has.
Yeah, that's obvious at this point. But I'm also not clear to the extent to which he needed his wrestling to diffuse some of the pressure from James in that fight, because James did keep going for it progressively more intensely as the fight continued. So yeah, if there's a lost step for Benitez physically, if perhaps, like Sadiq Youssef ultimately did, James is able to just keep pushing and walk through what might be slightly less snappy Benitez punches than previously, maybe this becomes an interesting fight down the stretch. Or maybe it becomes interesting immediately if Benitez gets cock hold. So it seems, once again, seems like a matchup where I can very confidently pick Benitez, but there are enough little X factors there that, I think it'll be exciting. Good matchup there. Benitez, Evloev, one a prospect, one possibly becoming an old man. Both very technical fighters. So there are some highlights on what is maybe not necessarily the most inspiring lineup you've ever seen at the end of this, our COVID season of the UFC. Well, sorry, the end of COVID season 1, I should say. Let's not get too optimistic.
Oh.
Yeah, 2021 is not going to be all that different, is it? Things aren't going to start over just because the calendar resets. Okay, well, let's talk about last weekend then. We finally reached the point where we have only 3 minutes left of the show, which is almost enough time for us to fill with a discussion of Anthony Smith and Devin Clark. That was, in fact, by the way, not nearly the worst part of that card. At least Anthony Smith mercifully just went out there and out-grappled Devin Clark. Cool.
He saved us.
Yep, which was cool.
You know, I was actually slightly worried when I was thinking about, you know, who Anthony Smith is, that he really works best when he's just maintaining like a long range against people. That's why he gave a tough-ish sort of fight to Jones. But like, it's when people like really come in at him that he panics a bit. I think we did see, and I was like, oh, maybe Devin Clark just rushing him over and over again might be a problem. And I think we did see that at the beginning because he got clocked right away. He's just not a like defensively sound fighter. Yeah, and I was even a little worried that his immediate response to that was to go for the grappling because even though it clearly was, you know, in retrospect, probably the safest course of action, it did present the possibility that he might get into like a physical fight with Clark. And Clark gets worn out, but so does Anthony Smith. But yeah, I agree. But it's just that the Devin Clark it's just not very good.
He's not, sadly.
Algio's good though, hooray!
Yeah, right. That's the other thing that happened on this card. God, I'm looking over the the lineup, and it's just a blank in my mind. I have so many of these fights, I have nothing. Hey, you know what? Before we move past it, though, because I think the only other one I really want to talk about is probably the Algio Carlisle fight that we previewed last week. I'll say 2 things, actually. 2 other fights. Parker Porter versus Josh Parisian was the rare, exciting heavyweight fight. Co-main event. Things didn't really get fun here until, like, the end of the card. But Parker Porter is like another win, just based on what we were talking about in the Tyson Jones segment. Another win for technique. Because when Zane Simon and I were picking this fight last week, both of us were sort of lamenting the fact that we felt compelled to pick Parisian, which obviously in retrospect we shouldn't. He very clearly lost. Because Porter is like a less athletically remarkable heavyweight, but one of the rare regional heavyweights who actually has like a process and a style that is like, you know, not just stumbled upon over the course of a messy fight. It's a thing he comes in intending to do, and he does it every time. He's like a jab and combination boxing guy, and like a jabbing into the clinch guy. He has a whole game, and God damn it worked in the UFC. So he's no longer just the guy who John Jones beat at the very beginning of his career. He's now actually a UFC winning heavyweight. So good for him. But Bill Algio and Spike Carlisle, Phil, tell me about it. Did we both pick Carlisle?
No, we did. I convinced you to.
God damn you. And Zane really made me wish I hadn't. Like, that's the wonderful experience I get on this show, is you talk me into some bullshit, and then Zane makes me realize what a fucking idiot you are. One day later.
Son of a bitch.
That son of a bitch. Well,
I mean, I don't think Spike Carlisle really helped himself this time, because he tried to, like I said before we started recording, but he really looked like he was trying to be technical. He was trying to pick his spots at the beginning of this fight.
Ah, yes.
And he can't do that.
He's
not good.
Full Alex Hernandez. Yep, I love it.
And or Paulo Costa. It's like,
Yes.
you don't have to be technical. Not going to do anything.
Yep.
The burden of sentience, which was forced upon him by Billy Quarantillo.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't do the same thing against this Bill. And then,
You know what? I'm convinced that was the extent of his thought process. Another Bill, but that was what beat.
Bill's scary. So, I mean, I think he sort of screwed his chance to shock Joe with his speed and power by, like, not doing much.
Yeah.
Like, trying to feint and stuff. And just allowed Algeo to beat him up by being much, much better at him than him.
Mm-hmm. Once again, a fun exhibition of Bill Algeo's, like, scrambling ability. Right? Like, that actually was an instrumental part of this win, because say what you will about Carlisle, no matter how technical he's trying to be, that man is fucking strong when you tie up and get on the ground with him. It's a dangerous spot to be in. And as you pointed out, he almost like bulldog choked. He almost successfully bulldog choked Bill Algeo in the first round, which is definitely the kind of move you only get if you are both very strong and have no idea what you're doing.
Like, Carlisle still has, like, legitimately good cardio considering how he fights.
Yeah, he fights like a fucking moron.
And he tired Algeo out.
Yes.
By the fact that Algeo was fighting way more, like, just way more functionally than he was. They were both sort of equally tired at the end of the fight.
Yeah.
It was just that Algeo could fight good, and that whilst he was still tired, and Carlisle cannot fight good.
But watching Carlisle on the ground, I get some of the same vibes when I occasionally watch a Kevin Lee fight, where he can just cheat. Like, he can get his back taken, but if he has an arm worked in there, even though, like, technically you're supposed to be able to catch that arm and endanger it or use it against him, he'll just flip you off his back and stand up. Very physically strong. So I think the other thing we liked about this, and I want to mention it, the other thing that you and I both liked about this win, Phil, was that it retroactively gives some shine to Ricardo Lamas. Because there was reason to believe, that, like, Ricardo Lamas is obviously slipping. He's got to slip. He's an old man. He's been fighting forever. And no one expected Bill Algeo to, like, hurt him with a knee or for that fight to be as competitive as it was. And you could take away from that further evidence that that Lamas is worsening and getting older and so on and so forth. But hey, you know what, Bill Algeo, it'll take more than just a dumb Superman to beat Bill Algeo, and I think that is a credit to Ricardo Lamas, who, like, actually convincingly beat this guy.
Absolutely.
And also, like Bill Algeo, I can officially say, fantastic addition to the featherweight division. The guy is an extremely fun fighter, and I do really enjoy his fighting style. So, good shit. Yeah. Carlisle, the vile Carlisle, did not come away with a win. In fact, he did the most predictable dumb guy's version of a smart MMA fighter move and tried to become quote-unquote technical. I love seeing that. It's great. It's really everything I wanted out of it. And that is all that I want out of this card. I will now forget about it. Oh, wait, the other one thing. Sumu Derji. Another guy who's just a guy. Came in, was set up to lose to Louis Smolka. And I recall saying before that fight, and this, if you have the same contextual understanding of MMA that I do, you will feel what I'm saying here. I had to pick Louis Smolka against him because of wrestling. Okay? That's how bad Sumu Derji's takedown defense was in his UFC debut. It's not that bad anymore. Which forces me to look back at him and realize what I probably would have said about him without that terrible deficiency of takedown defense. And if his wrestling was as good then as it looked in this fight and in his one previous to this, I would have picked him against Louis Smolka. He's actually, I think, a good fighter. He's a freakishly long and tall flyweight. He's super accurate, good counterpuncher. And as long as you, like, can't take him down, he's actually really efficient and effective. So that's another one to check out. Not that him beating Malcolm Gordon in 44 seconds means anything, but hey, it'll only take 44 seconds out of your day to see it. So, and that's about it for this week's Heavy Hands, I think. Phil, have you got anything to plug to our listeners?
Not this week. I don't think I've got anything this week.
Okay. I don't think I do either, although, having said that, I said that last week, and then...
Yeah. Is Zane now going to bully you into producing something?
Yeah, he'll probably bully me into producing something for... I don't know, which fight on this card seems most likely to get canceled?
I mean, the main event again.
Yeah, probably. Well, it's already happened 3 times. I think what I'll probably end up doing is writing... an almost immediately obsolete article about OSP versus Jamahal Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Because both of those dudes are about to get COVID. All right. Well, yeah, nothing else for me to plug this week. If you missed it, I guess go check out my Derek Lewis piece from last week. It is mostly just about Derek Lewis and not specifically about Derek Lewis versus Curtis Blades. So it'll probably be reposted next time that he gets a fight. But until then, I think it is, if you care to read it, it is still somewhat worth reading. As
Very
mentioned,
enjoyable.
You what?
Enjoyable. I thought it was excellent.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. If you, as I mentioned earlier in the show, if you are feeling justifiably butthurt about the lack of bonus content in November, I will literally be working the moment we stop this recording, Phil, on a bonus episode for the very beginning of December. I'm going to try to get several of those out to you guys in December, so make sure you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's only $3 a month to either get or not get your bonus episodes. Usually we put them out, though, and this month we're going to try and give you guys a little bit of a Christmas makeup, so hopefully you can look forward to that, and also to next week's show when we will be drowning still in a sea of UFC mediocrity. I can't wait. Phil, I can tell you're excited. I can just hear your microphone sort of quivering with barely withheld anticipation over there. No need to say anything. I can tell you can't wait. I can't wait. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Heavy Hands. If you came here today for the final boards of Face Punching Games, the right place has been Heavy Hands. I thought if I rushed through it,
Not let people get a word in edgeways.
Yeah, I rushed.
As someone who works in the corporate world, I would like to say this is in fact a surprisingly common tactic.